Yeah, someone was kind enough to scream that we were Marxists a couple of minutes ago, which was epically appreciated. Yeah, he's joking. We're not Stalin fans. All right, so yeah, I mean, Jeffrey and I have been sitting out here pretty much all day on Tuesdays for the last couple of months, and the number of people who've come up and screamed at us that we're communists and Marxists because we got that Black Lives Matter flag, it got annoying. So I'm a philosopher, but I dabble in the history, so it's also a familiar accusation. All right, so this "you're a communist" lie is really old. One of the frustrating things about knowing history is that you get tired of things that have been happening for hundreds of years, even though they haven't been happening to you for hundreds of years. So here we go, 170 years of imaginary communists. So those of you who have a program can look at the back of the front page. This is a lie. It's a lie from the 1850s that abolitionists were communists. Right? So in the 1850s, the equivalent of Black Lives Matter were being called communists by the equivalent of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. Right? The people like us were being called communists by the people like them. Right? That was in the 1850s. So I've got here a couple of passages from a sermon and a book. So we got this sermon here from Benjamin Thornwell. This was from 1850. And this was a widely reprinted sermon. It is actually still admired by neo-Confederates nowadays. So this is his sermon on the moral education of, well, I think he said Negroes. It's slightly small print, sorry. So he wants to describe the current situation as of 1850, the massive political conflict in the country. It is not the narrow question of abolitionism or of slavery, not simply whether we shall emancipate our Negroes or not. The real question is the relation of man to society, of state to the individual, and of the individual to states. A question as broad as the interests of the human race. These are the mighty questions which are shaking thrones to their centers, upheaving the masses like an earthquake and rocking the solid pillars of this union. The parties in this conflict are not merely abolitionists and slaveholders. They are atheists, socialists, communists, red Republicans, Jacobins on the one side, along with the abolitionists, and the friends of order and regulated freedom on the other side with slavery. So there he is, saying that the abolitionists were basically communists. Right? All right, next page over. This is an address given by the guy who later designed what we think of when we think of the Confederate flag. Come out some other week and I'll give a lesson about who made Confederate flags. But this was William Porcher Miles in a speech that he gave, I think, in 1856. He was talking about this Hungarian guy who'd been going around the United States hitting up people for money for some kind of Hungarian revolution thing that I have not followed in depth. And he's like, you know, I don't know why it is that all the liberals love this guy so much. I mean, if he's just, wants to reform Hungary, that's one thing, but if Korsav's aim be merely the establishment of a separate nationality of Hungary without any definite views with reference to ulterior changes in her interior organization, political or social, what sympathy have red Republicans, socialists and communists, abolitionists, free soilers, and barn burners with his cause? Right, so the guy is going around saying, I want you to help me with Hungary, and he's saying, but look, if he just wanted, to change Hungary a little bit, why do the abolitionists and communists like him so much? Right, they're on the same list again. All right, and then, he goes on and a couple of pages later, all cannot have everything. This would seem self-evident, yet it is the very contrary of this which red republicanism, socialism, or whatever other form the hydra-headed monster may assume practically asserts. All right, so here we've got pro-slavery Southerners from the 1850s saying that abolitionists were communists. Well, they weren't, right? And they said so. So I got a couple of passages from William Lloyd Garrison, the most famous abolitionist leader of the time. I'm sorry, the print on the right side of the next page came out too small and vague. But the one on the left you can kind of see. He's talking about the labor movement. William Lloyd Garrison dismissed the entire labor movement. It wasn't just that he dismissed socialism or communism. He's like, seriously, guys, we're not going to have any kind of equality, and it just doesn't matter at all. So he says, Young America raises a loud outcry against land monopoly. This monopoly is undeniably wicked and disastrous. The sooner it's broken up, the better. But what hope, nay, what possibility is there that in a nation where it is reputable to steal men, the right of every man to a just portion of the soil will be conceded and enjoyed? It is absurd for that paper to say the shortest way to abolish slavery of every form is by preventing any one man from owning two men's portions of the earth. This equalization can never take place. Right? And you can read the whole thing, and it's a long explanation of why it is that labor politics are basically a bad idea. So William Lloyd Garrison, leading abolitionist, was specifically anti-labor movement, much less anti-socialist or anti-communist. All right. Now, so enough for the 1850s, where the abolitionists were being called communists. Right, okay, skip up 100 years, and then you get the exact same lies, in some cases, in the exact same words. So everyone who can see this, look at the little table over here. Right under lie 2, Dr. King was a communist. Gallup has been doing polls for a really long time. So they were doing polls about Dr. King in the early 60s, and then they did it again in 2011. And those of you who can see this will note a pretty stark change. So in August 1966, 63% of Americans had an unfavorable view of Dr. King. 1/3 of us had a favorable view. Bump up to after the man died, and then in August 2011, 94% of us have a favorable opinion of him, and 69% of us have a very favorable opinion of him. Statistically, in 1965, you would not have been here. Statistically, in 1965, you would have been complaining about the integration of a school, statistically speaking. Right? We have this recollection of Dr. King as being this universally beloved, very peaceful person. He was not. He was a broadly despised person. Right? So whenever we've got a broadly despised person nowadays, bear in mind that person's being treated a lot like Dr. King. That could be because he's actually a jackass, or it could be because history repeats itself. So anyway, Dr. King was not actually widely popular in white America at the time. All right, he was specifically pursued by the FBI for being a communist. So those of you who can see this here, you can see this memorandum. This was written by J. Edgar Hoover's right-hand man, Mr. Sullivan, on a subject, Communist Party USA Negro question. You can skip down to the bottom as he talks about how they're going to surveil Dr. King. He says, he is the most dangerous Negro of the future in this nation from the standpoint of communism, the Negro, and national security. Right, all right, so there they are in the 1960s smearing Dr. King as a communist. Well, he wasn't. I mean, he had a friend who was a communist, but he was not a communist, and you can tell that because he wrote a lot. Right, so here he is in Stride Toward Freedom. He wrote in 1958. During the Christmas holidays of 1949, I decided to spend my spare time reading Karl Marx to try to understand the appeal of communism for many people. For the first time, I carefully scrutinized Das Kapital, which I'll say is an interesting book, and the Communist Manifesto, which isn't. Don't read it, like literally skip that book. In reading such communist writings, I drew certain conclusions that have remained with me as convictions to this day. I rejected their materialistic interpretation of history. For the communists, there is no divine government, no absolute moral order, there are no fixed immutable principles, consequently almost anything is justifiable means to the millennial end. This type of relativism was abhorrent to me. I opposed communism's political totalitarianism. This deprecation of individual freedom was objectionable to me. I am convinced now as I was then that man is an end because he is a child of God. Man is not made for the state is made for man. To deprive man of freedom is to relegate him to the status of a thing rather than elevate him to the status of a person. Man must never be treated as a means to the end of the state, but always as an end within himself. Dr. King was identifying communism with slavery and Jim Crow. And he was criticizing communist methods as specifically the methods of violence used against African Americans. He's not a communist. He took communism as an archetype of the exact thing against which he was fighting, which used the exact means that he rejected. And yet, if you look at the bottom of the page, there were over 200 of this billboard put up by the White Citizens Council all across the South in 1965. Martin Luther King at Communist Training School. It was a voter registration drive. Bonus coincidence, everybody. Turn the page. All right, so I said they were using the same words. It wasn't just that history rhymes. In this case, it was an actual repetition. So here's part of a speech given by J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, who was going around talking about how Dr. King was a communist. So he had been given this award from St. Ignatius, and he said, the law of the land is above any individual. All must abide by it. If we shortcut the law, we play a dangerous game which can only result in total defeat for all of us, because if we destroy our system of government by law, we destroy our only means of achieving a stable society. It is a great misfortune that the zealots or pressure groups always think with their emotions, seldom with reason. They have no compunction in carping, lying, and exaggerating with the fiercest passion. They cry liberty when they really mean license. Bear that phrase in mind. When man places himself above the law and bases his decisions on his own selfish interests, he aids the communists' relentless efforts to destroy the ideals of our civilization. He contributes heavily to reducing life to the code of the jungle, by making it easier for communism to spread its deadly doctrines, terror, and brutalization of man. All right, so there's J. Edgar Hoover laying out a moral vision of law and order using the communism of which he accused Dr. King as an archetype of the anarchic pursuit not of order and liberty, but of ungoverned license. And he says that communists are selfish. All right, here was that William Porter Miles guy back 100 years ago. By liberty, the modern speculators mean a naked and absolute freedom from all but self-imposed control, an entire and unlimited equality in social privileges and political power. Its very essence is a mixture of selfishness and vanity, the one tending to overthrow anyway. And then look at the title page. He quotes Milton talking about, they say liberty when they mean license. Right? So he borrowed this phrase from Milton, the Paradise Lost guy, and he's using it in the 1850s to say abolitionists/communists mean anarchy when they say freedom. And then in the 1960s, J. Edgar Hoover is saying literally verbatim, civil rights activists/communists are saying liberty when they mean anarchy. They didn't even change the words of their lie that time around. All right, let's skip up to the present. Lie number 3, the movement for Black Lives is Marxist. All right, and there we've got Ben Carson calling Black Lives Matter a Marxist organization. All right, so apparently 2 of the 3 founders of Black Lives Matter, one of them said once on a YouTube video a while back that she and one of the other leaders were trained Marxists, which doesn't actually mean all that much. So if you would actually read Das Kapital, you will see that Marxism is an extremely vague kind of a term. If you think that the most important thing in life is to work hard, to provide for your family, you are a Marxist in a certain sense of Marxism. If you don't think that people should get paid for not working, then you are a Marxist in a certain sense of the word. Right? Marxism means a lot of things, and many of them are not great. I don't think he's much as a revolutionary. I don't really care for him very much as an economist, but he did make some interesting points. So anyway, here is the What We Believe from the Black Lives Matter webpage. Right? So this is going to be where you'd find their Marxist agenda. All right. We are unapologetically black in our positioning. In affirming that Black Lives Matter, we need not qualify our position. To love and desire freedom and justice for ourselves is a prerequisite for wanting the same for others.
Yeah.
Do you know what that means?
Yes.
It means that all lives matter.
Yes.
All lives matter is literally in their program.
Yes.
The Black Lives Matter organization is saying, look, all lives don't matter until black ones do, so here we are. Black Lives Matter, right? This organization is accused of being extremely divisive. Their claim is, look, we can't appreciate everybody until we at least appreciate ourselves. Right? That's an affirmation of individualism. There's nothing here about revolution, dictatorship, collective ownership of the means of production. Further down, they say we make our spaces family friendly and enable parents to fully participate with their children. We dismantle the patriarchal practice that requires mothers to work double shifts so that they can mother in private even as they participate in public justice work. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. So we make our spaces family friendly. That's where people get the idea that BLM is anti-family. It's from where they say that their spaces are family friendly. Look, they say they're family friendly, therefore they hate the family. They're not just pro-family, they're pro-traditional family. Like with the whole extended thing and all the cousins and aunts and uncles who live nearby, that's in their program. That's not anti-family. They're saying that that suburb thing that white people invented in the 1950s because they were being subsidized, that doesn't need to be the rule. When they say we reject the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement, they're saying that we don't actually have to live like the US federal government encouraged people, white people, to live in the 1950s. That's not an anti-family agenda, right? So if the Black Lives Matter organization with its alleged trained Marxists comes up with this pro-individualistic, pro-family agenda, what do you think the rest of the movement for Black Lives that doesn't have any leaders at all are interested in? And it is not overthrowing the government, it's not revolution, it's not collective ownership of the means of production. That is all an absolute lie. It is the same lie from 170 years ago. It's 170 years of imaginary communists. All right, now here's why this matters. Last page. So J. Edgar Hoover got tired of Dr. King complaining about the police. So he actually said that Dr. King was the most notorious liar in America. And he said that in public at a press conference. All right, Dr. King rejected this. So there's Dr. King rebuts Hoover charges from the New York Times in 1965. Dr. King says, I never advised Negroes in Albany not to report to the FBI. On the contrary, we reported every incident, but we were dismayed by the fact that nothing was ever done. The fact that no arrests have been made in the brutalities at Albany, the murder of 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi, and the bombing of a church in Birmingham, Alabama, has left us all discouraged. This has encouraged individuals on the lunatic fringe to feel that they are aided and abetted by federal agents. It's 1965, and the cops were already handing out the water bottles to Kyle Rittenhouse. Almost literally. Police inaction emboldens right-wing fanatics. That was true in 1965. All right. Dr. King said he had never made a blanket criticism of the FBI and its agents. He said he believed a Southerner dedicated to his job could be as effective as one from the North. Quote, rather than criticize the FBI, Dr. King said, I've acted as a mediator urging Negroes to keep faith with the FBI and not to lose hope. But you can't explain to a Negro why a plane can be bombed and its pieces scattered for miles and the crime can be solved, but they can't find out who bombed a church. You know what else they can't find out? They cannot figure out how to arrest Breonna Taylor's killers. This is 55 years ago, and it's ripped from the headlines. This is 170 years and many, many more years before that of the exact same lie. Now, people who love these damn monuments say, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And then they repeat it because they don't know it. That monument conceals facts about our past. It has to come down.